He stood at the front of the classroom, hands trembling, as the professor read his name aloud, not to praise him, but to accuse him of cheating, on a paper he hadn't even submitted yet. The class fell silent, eyes turned, and then the professor said it. You people always find new ways to fake brilliance. Malik's world shattered, until he found one hidden file that could burn the whole university down. But if he used it, someone might lose more than just tenure. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The glass doors of Hargrove Hall let in a soft morning light that danced across polished tile floors and freshly waxed corridors. Students moved in casual waves, some with coffees, others glued to their phones, all heading to their first classes of the semester. Among them walked Malik Turner, shoulders squared, steps measured, not fast, not slow, just intentional. His hoodie read Wayne State Alumni Prep in faded gold, and his backpack bore signs of wear from too many late nights at too many jobs. Malik had a quiet energy about him. He didn't dress to impress or speak to be heard, but his eyes, they stayed observant, calculating, never missing a detail. Room 4B was at the end of the corridor, where the air turned slightly colder, and the wood-paneled doors felt more like walls of a courtroom than a classroom. A brass plaque read Philosophy 401, Logic and Epistemology, and beneath it, in neat black serif, Professor Edmund Whitmore. Malik entered quietly, taking a seat near the center, not too front row to seem eager, not too far back to look disengaged. His eyes scanned the room. 32 students. He counted. Of them, only he was black. The door creaked open again, this time admitting Dr. Whitmore, whose every step felt like it belonged to someone from another century. He wore a navy blazer with leather-patched elbows, and a pair of pristine spectacles perched on the edge of a long, pale nose. He greeted the class with a clipped nod, adjusted his glasses, and began. No laptops. Logic begins with discipline, not Google. Some students chuckled nervously, already reaching for pens and notebooks. Malik did the same, flipping open a spiral pad he bought on sale 2 nights before. 15 minutes into the lecture, the door opened. A white girl with a messy bun and Starbucks cup slipped in. Then 2 more students followed, talking quietly until they realized the room had stilled. Dr. Whitmore paused, barely reacting, then continued as if nothing had happened. But when Malik, who had arrived precisely 1 minute past the hour, took his seat earlier, the tone had been very different. Whitmore had said then, pausing his chalk mid-stroke, eyes scanning Malik. Detroit runs on its own time, I suppose. The comment hung in the air, subtle enough to pass for a joke, sharp enough to draw a few raised eyebrows. Malik had smiled thinly, eyes flicking toward the white students now sliding in unnoticed. He didn't say a word, not then. It wasn't the first time. Malik had long learned the difference between a laugh and a warning, between being tolerated and being targeted. His mother used to tell him, make them see you as a mind, not a skin. But experience had taught him otherwise. To many, the skin was the mind. Still, he was here, a philosophy major with a 4.0 GPA, on full academic scholarship, and recently published in a minor journal for his essay on African moral frameworks. He knew how to move in spaces that weren't built for him. But Dr. Whitmore wasn't just any professor. He was one of the last untouchables on campus. Tenured 30 years, former Rhodes Scholar, with books cited in every major logic course across the country, revered, respected, and unchallenged. As the lecture progressed, Malik noticed something else. Whitmore never made eye contact with him. Not once. He called on 4 students to answer introductory questions, all white. When a 5th student, a white guy in a Patagonia vest, mumbled an incorrect answer, Whitmore chuckled and said, close enough. The spirit of the answer is correct. Malik had to suppress a scoff. He knew what was happening. He'd seen it before, played out in classrooms, meetings, interviews. The slow, measured way some people made you feel smaller. Not by what they said, but by what they chose not to see. Still, he took notes. He analyzed the structure of Whitmore's logic diagrams, traced the symbolic notations, and compared them silently to the ones he'd studied independently over the summer. Because Malik had come prepared, not just for the course but for this. After class ended, students rose, chatting lightly as they filtered out. Malik was halfway to the door when he heard it. Mr. Turner, Whitmore called, voice even but laced with something unreadable. A moment of your time, if you would. Malik turned slowly, catching the narrowed eyes of a few classmates. A couple of them gave him sympathetic looks. Most just moved on. He approached the front of the room, notebook still clutched in hand. Whitmore didn't invite him to sit. He stood by the chalkboard, erasing slowly, methodically. "Your record is impressive," he said without turning. 4 mo. Published undergraduate. Even a recommendation from Dean Hargrove. "I imagine you've worked very hard." Malik kept his posture neutral. "Yes, sir." "And yet," Whitmore continued, turning now, "hard work doesn't always equate to understanding, especially in philosophy. It's not just about effort, it's about capacity." The pause that followed wasn't long, but it was long enough. "Understood," Malik replied calmly, though his stomach coiled. "I look forward to proving my capacity." Whitmore smiled tight, calculated. "I'm sure you do." He walked over to his desk, flipping through a folder. Then, handing Malik a separate syllabus, he said, "I'd like to assign you a supplementary research component, independent work, parallel to the main curriculum." Malik took the paper. "Why?" "I believe students with your background often bring unique insights. This is an opportunity to explore them more deeply. If you're capable, that is." Malik held his expression steady, but his heart thudded in his chest. The syllabus wasn't supplementary, it was excessive. 10 times the reading, complex, obscure philosophers. A research paper requiring an original thesis in African metaphysical logic. No one else had this assignment. He knew it. He also knew that if he pushed back, he'd be labeled ungrateful, or worse, playing the race card. But if he accepted it, he'd be setting himself up for a rigged challenge. "You'll need to submit weekly updates," Whitmore added, turning back to erase the board. "Let's see if you're as smart as your transcript says." The words hit harder than any slur. They didn't need to be loud. Racism, Malik had learned, was more often quiet, well-spoken, and hiding behind syllabi. As he walked out of the room, paper in hand, Malik didn't say a word, but his jaw clenched. Not in defeat, but in decision. He wasn't walking into a class anymore. He was walking into a fight. Just as he reached the hallway, a girl he'd never met before brushed past him and whispered, barely audible, "He does this to the ones he's afraid of. Be careful." The girl's voice lingered in Malik's ear as he made his way down the hallway, eyes forward but mind racing. "He does this to the ones he's afraid of. Be careful." The words felt like a warning, a breadcrumb from someone who'd already been burned. Malik turned to see who had whispered them, but she had disappeared into the crowd of students now pouring out of nearby lecture halls. He clutched the alternate syllabus tighter as he walked. His heart beat faster than it should have. Not with fear. He knew fear, but with a strange mix of humiliation and fire. He wasn't sure yet which would win. By the time he got back to his dorm that evening, the fluorescent light above his desk flickered like it too. Couldn't decide whether to keep fighting or quit. Malik dropped his bag on the floor, sank into his chair, and stared at the printed syllabus again. Independent Logic Exploration, The Origins of Consciousness and African Epistemology. The title itself was absurd. This wasn't an extra credit assignment. This was a thesis-level research directive meant for graduate students in cultural philosophy or comparative metaphysics, not undergrad seniors juggling 2 part-time jobs and 5 classes. The document had no textbook references, no recommended readings, just a list of primary sources, most of which weren't available in the campus library system, and vague instructions. Construct a logical framework, reconciling African epistemological systems with Cartesian consciousness models. It was academic suicide, neatly packaged in 12 printed pages. He pulled up the class group chat on his phone, where students had already begun commiserating over reading loads and Whitmore's eccentric standards. Malik scrolled until he found a name he vaguely recognized, Rachel, the student who had given a decent summary during that morning's discussion. He typed out a quick message. Malik, hey, did anyone else get a separate assignment from Dr. Whitmore? He watched the 3 dots pulse, then stop, then start again. Rachel doubled. No? Why? Did you? Malik, yeah. A whole different syllabus. Solo project. Way off book. She didn't reply right away. Then finally, Rachel W. Whoa, that's weird. You're the only one? Malik, seems like it. No more dots appeared. The next morning in class, Malik kept his head down and his ears open. Whitmore didn't mention the assignment aloud. He didn't make eye contact with Malik either, just continued drawing logic trees and talking about syllogistic reasoning, as though everything was business as usual. But during a short break, Malik caught a few whispers behind him. Did you hear he's making that one kid do a totally different project?
Yeah, I heard it's like PhD level.
Dude's setting him up to fail. Malik didn't turn around. He just let the words settle. He had a feeling they weren't meant to hurt him, but they weren't meant to help him either. No one stood up. No one questioned it. When class ended, Malik walked up to Whitmore, who was stacking his notes in a leather folder. About the assignment, Malik said calmly. Can I ask why you chose me for it? Whitmore didn't even look up. I thought you might bring a unique perspective. There it was again. That smile. Cold. Knowing. The kind that says I've already decided who you are. Malik held his ground. It's not part of the syllabus. Whitmore finally met his eyes. True. But education isn't always fair, Mr. Turner. Sometimes the most capable students benefit from added challenge. Malik nodded, but his jaw tightened. Understood. As he walked away, a thin wave of laughter rippled from the front row, just loud enough to be felt, not heard. The next week was a blur. Between working the late shift at a campus bookstore and tutoring 2 freshmen in math, Malik barely found hours to sleep, let alone dissect entire academic frameworks that most professors never even touched. He hit up JSTOR, ProQuest, Google Scholar. He emailed librarians. He combed through footnotes of obscure books that referenced African philosophy, looking for primary sources. But most of it was either colonial-era anthropology, filtered through the racist gaze of European explorers, or so underfunded that the few existing academic papers had never been translated into English. He stayed up until 3 a.m. some nights, reading by the harsh white light of his desk lamp, filling notebook after notebook with half-translated theories, comparative logic maps, and questions that only led to more questions. At times he wanted to walk away, throw the assignment in the trash, confront the dean, demand fairness, but something inside him wouldn't let go. This wasn't just about a paper anymore. It was about why he had been chosen, about what they thought he wouldn't do. And more than that, it was about his mother. She had worked 16-hour nursing shifts while studying for her LPN license. She used to fall asleep in the kitchen chair, still holding her books, and wake up telling Malik, "Excellence isn't a choice, baby. It's protection." So he pushed. And on the 6th night, while digging through a translated journal from the 1960s about Akan cosmology, Malik found something. A reference to tree logic, a pre-colonial Ghanaian system of knowledge that didn't operate in linear progression like Western syllogisms, but in layered interconnected relationships. Each thought didn't follow another. It nested inside it. Logic in this system was relational, not linear. It changed everything. Malik's eyes widened. He flipped back through Whitmore's textbook and found something shocking, an entire paragraph ridiculing non-Western logic systems as philosophical artifacts rather than structured frameworks. But the description Whitmore used, twisted and distorted, closely resembled tree logic. Worse, Whitmore cited no source. That paragraph wasn't just dismissive. It was intellectually dishonest. Had Whitmore studied this and erased its validity? Had he known? Malik sat back in his chair, hand trembling. This wasn't just about academic rigor. This was about erasure. About a white professor building prestige off the bones of a buried truth. The next day, Malik printed his initial research notes and quietly slid them into a manila folder. He wasn't planning to submit yet. Not until he had more, but he wanted Whitmore to know he wasn't backing down. After class, he approached the professor and handed him the folder. "I've started," Malik said, voice calm. Whitmore took the folder without opening it, raising a brow. "And what interpretation are you exploring?" "Relational logic frameworks from pre-colonial West Africa," Malik said. "Specifically the tree logic model." For the first time, Whitmore hesitated. His hand tensed slightly around the folder. "Interesting choice," he said finally. "Although you may find sources to be limited." Malik's eyes didn't move. "That's by design, isn't it?" Whitmore looked at him. For a moment, something flickered in the professor's expression. Not fear, not guilt, something older, like contempt wrapped in caution. Then the smile returned. "Well, good luck," he said simply. "I look forward to seeing how you reconcile mysticism with formal logic." Malik didn't reply. He just nodded and turned to leave. That night, he dove deeper. The more he read, the more he saw the lie. Western academic systems hadn't just ignored African logic, they had actively erased it, rebranded it as folklore, and then mined pieces of it for their own philosophical theories, without attribution. And Whitmore's book wasn't just a product of that system. It was part of the theft. He scanned one of Whitmore's earliest academic papers from the 1980s, and found something buried in the footnotes. A phrase, relational induction patterns, as observed in migratory cultures, albeit lacking structural formalism. It was nearly identical to a description in the Akan manuscript Malik had just read, word for word. Whitmore had known. He'd read the work, quoted it, and dismissed it without a single credit, not even a reference. It wasn't just an oversight. It was plagiarism through suppression. A theft disguised as superiority. Malik leaned back from the screen, eyes burning, heart pounding, when suddenly, his laptop flickered. Then, without warning, the entire screen went black. And with it, all his notes disappeared. The moment Malik's laptop went black, a surge of disbelief swept through his chest like an electric current. He stared at the dark screen, frozen in place, fingers hovering over the keyboard as if refusing to accept what had just happened. He tapped the power button once, twice, held it down, nothing. The soft hum of the fan had gone silent, the screen dead as stone. He yanked the charger from the wall and plugged it back in. The charging light blinked once, then vanished. "No," he muttered, voice cracking from panic. Every note, every annotated PDF, every side-by-side comparison, and the early outline of his argument gone. For a moment he just sat there staring at his reflection in the black glass of the screen, stunned. Then the weight of it hit him all at once. He hadn't backed up the files, not to the cloud, not to a flash drive. He had been working fast and late, always planning to back everything up once the draft was finished.
Now, it was gone.
He grabbed his coat and bag and ran out of the dorm. The IT help desk in the student center was barely staffed at 9 p.m., but Malik managed to catch a technician named Daniel, a sleepy junior in a hoodie and glasses, just as he was packing up. "Please," Malik said, out of breath. "My laptop shut down out of nowhere. I think everything got wiped." Daniel sighed, setting his bag back down. "What kind of laptop?" "Lenovo ThinkPad. School issued." "All right, let's take a look." For 15 minutes Daniel plugged in cables, ran diagnostics, and tried to boot into recovery mode. "I don't get it," he muttered, frowning. "It's like the system image was corrupted. Entire OS is gone. Did you install anything recently?" "No, just working on a paper. You might be able to recover some files if the drive's not totally fried. But it'd need to go to advanced support. Could take a week, maybe 2.
Looks heart dropped. That's my entire research project. I can't wait 2 weeks.
Daniel shrugged. "Wish I could do more, man." As Malik stood, Daniel added, "You know, sometimes weird stuff happens when people connect to unsecured networks. Use any public Wi-Fi lately?" Malik froze. He had used the philosophy department's guest Wi-Fi the day before just for an hour, while printing something in the office lounge. He left without another word. The next morning, Malik stood outside the main campus library just after opening. The building was still quiet, save for the low buzz of printers and the occasional cough echoing across the high ceilings. Students trickled in slowly, bundled in hoodies and sweats, not quite awake. He went straight to the special collections desk, a glassed-off room in the back of the second floor that housed books not available through the general database. The librarian on duty was an older black woman with graying dreadlocks and sharp eyes behind thin frames. Her name tag read Ms. Dorsey. "I'm looking for texts on pre-colonial African logic systems," Malik said, voice steady despite the ache in his chest. Ms. Dorsey studied him for a moment, then pushed her chair back and stood. She walked to the locked cabinet behind her, pulled out a small ring of keys, and selected one with care. "We don't keep those on the open shelves," she said. "They get stolen. Or go missing." She unlocked the cabinet and pulled out a thin, dust-covered book bound in cracked leather. "Only one copy in the state. Don't scan it. Don't take it out of the room." Malik took the book, reverently. It was titled The Thought Trees of Akan. No author listed. The preface was written in French, dated 1911, and the rest was a hybrid of Akan and English, riddled with marginal notes. As he turned each fragile page, a new world opened. Logic that worked in circles, not lines. Arguments were rooted in relationships, not contradictions. It was nothing like Descartes, Nothing like Plato or Kant. It wasn't inferior. It was different, and maybe that difference was exactly why no one taught it. 2 hours passed before Malik looked up and realized someone was watching him from outside the glass wall of the reading room. A student in a philosophy hoodie stood near the copy machines, glancing over every few seconds before whispering something to another student beside her. Then they both laughed. Malik ignored them and kept reading. But the whispers grew louder in the days that followed. In class, he noticed a shift. People stared at him longer. Some smirked. A few stopped making eye contact entirely. He overheard a pair of students outside the lecture hall. "Isn't he doing that weird African voodoo logic or something?" "Yeah. Heard Whitmore's letting him cook his own paper just to watch him crash." Even Rachel, who had messaged him earlier, had gone quiet. During the next lecture, Whitmore discussed symbolic reasoning, using whiteboards full of formulas and classic examples. At one point, he turned to the class and said, "Of course, some cultures consider logic a communal truth. Can you imagine? Truth by committee?" A few students chuckled. Malik felt the burn under his skin. He raised his hand. Whitmore arched an eyebrow. "Yes, Mr. Turner. Would you say all logic is culturally neutral?" The room went still. Whitmore smiled tightly. "Logic, Mr. Turner, is one of the few universals we still have. Gravity doesn't care about culture. And neither do syllogisms." Malik didn't push further. He just nodded slowly and lowered his hand. But the tension hung in the air like smoke. After class, Miss Dorsey found him in the library again. "You been digging?" she said, pulling up a chair across from him. "I'm trying," Malik said. "But every direction I go, it's like someone already tried to erase the trail." Miss Dorsey leaned back, arms folded. "That's because they did. Academia wasn't built for us. It was built around us. Your professor ain't the first to pretend African minds didn't think." Malik hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Because I tried doing the same thing 30 years ago. Wrote my thesis on Nubian astronomy. You know what happened?" Malik shook his head. "They lost my paper. Twice. Then accused me of submitting late. Ended up switching programs just to graduate. That's when I learned some knowledge ain't meant to be found here. Not unless you fight for it." Malik sat in silence, the weight of her words pressing deep. "Be careful," she added. "If you start speaking too loud, they'll make sure you disappear too." That night, Malik sat down to rewrite everything. He borrowed a used laptop from a friend, rented a scanner, reorganized his notes. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He just poured everything into that paper, fueled by caffeine, anger, and something more sacred, hope. He wasn't just proving a point. He was resurrecting buried knowledge. And when he was done, he saved it twice. One copy to the cloud, one to a USB drive taped beneath his desk. Finally, he exhaled. It was nearly dawn. But just as he leaned back, relieved, his phone buzzed. It was an email from the campus server. "Draft submission received, 3:07 a.m. File attached." He blinked. He hadn't submitted anything. He opened the email. Heart pounding. The attached file was titled, "Turner Final Draft." He clicked. What opened wasn't his paper. It was a doctored version, a jumbled mix of plagiarized sources and poorly formatted text. Gibberish, lazy, fraudulent. And his name was on it. 30 seconds later, another email arrived. Subject, Academic Misconduct Review Meeting. Scheduled. Huge. Malik sat frozen in his chair, eyes locked on the fraudulent file still open on his laptop. He reread the attached email a dozen times, trying to make sense of what was happening. The timestamps were real. The email came from the official campus server, but the contents were unmistakably not his. It wasn't just bad. It was intentional. The kind of clumsy plagiarism that would set off automatic red flags in any academic system. The kind of sabotage designed not just to discredit, but to destroy. He felt his throat tighten. The draft he'd worked on for weeks, gone, replaced, forged, and now, a disciplinary hearing was waiting on the other end of that second email. He grabbed his bag, slipped the laptop inside, and headed straight for the IT center. The sky was still gray with dawn, campus half asleep. His steps were fast, clipped, focused. By 7:45 a.m., he was standing in front of the help desk, palms sweating. "I need to speak with someone about a security breach," he told the receptionist. Urgently. The tech on duty was a younger guy, maybe early 20s, nose ring and half-lidded eyes that barely flicked upward. "What kind of breach?" My account was accessed. A paper I never submitted got sent under my name. It's fake. I think someone used my login. The tech blinked. What system? Candace. Email. My laptop crashed 2 nights ago. And ever since.
The guy cut him off. What's your student ID?
Malik gave it, breathing hard as the tech typed slowly. Too slowly. I already filed a report last night, Malik added. But now there's a disciplinary meeting set. I didn't send that paper. The tech leaned back in his chair. Look, if your account was used to submit the file, we assume the owner submitted it. It's a personal responsibility thing. Malik's voice cracked. I'm telling you, someone spoofed my login, or accessed it remotely. The draft they submitted wasn't mine. Sir, the tech said, tone shifting. There's a process for these things. If you're unhappy, file a support ticket and wait for escalation. I don't have time to wait, Malik snapped. My academic record is on the line. A second tech appeared from a back office, glancing at the commotion. Malik noticed him whisper something to the receptionist. You're saying the system can't even tell where a login came from? IP address? Anything? Malik pressed. That information isn't released to students, the first tech replied, his voice turning flat. And you're being kinda aggressive right now. Malik drew back. Aggressive? I'm just trying to help you, the guy added quickly. But if you keep raising your voice, I'm not yelling. I'm asking questions. At that moment, 2 campus security officers appeared at the door. Is there a problem here? One asked. Malik turned toward them, shocked. Are you serious? The receptionist behind the desk stood. We're just trying to defuse the situation. He got loud. I asked about an unauthorized file submission. Malik interrupted. That's it. Sir, we're going to need you to step outside. One of the officers said, hand resting on his belt. Students had started gathering. 2 girls near the printer paused mid-sentence to watch. A student Malik vaguely recognized from his dorm took out their phone, filming maybe, or pretending to text. Malik's chest tightened. He saw it before it happened. One officer moved closer. Let's talk outside. I'm not resisting, Malik said, raising his hand slightly, but I have a right to ask why my work was tampered with. Let's go, the officer repeated, this time placing a hand on Malik's elbow. Malik didn't pull away, but the message was clear. He was no longer a student at a help desk. He was a problem being removed. The hallway felt longer than usual, as he was escorted out. The murmur of watching students followed him all the way to the exit. No one said anything, not one word. They didn't have to. Back in his dorm room, Malik dropped into his chair, still in disbelief. The injustice wasn't new, but this was personal, targeted, and systematic. His reputation, carefully built, quietly earned, was now under review. His professors, his peers, even the institution itself would see him not as a victim, but as a potential fraud. He pulled up the university portal. His status had already been flagged. Academic integrity violation, pending investigation. The hearing was set for 3 days from now. He opened his email inbox. A message from Dr. Whitmore sat at the top. Subject: concern re your submission. He clicked. Malik, I was surprised to see your draft submitted early. However, I must express concern over its quality and authenticity. Several passages appear to be lifted directly from unsourced materials, and the logic structure lacks coherence. Given our prior discussions, I expected more. The board has been notified. E. Whitmore. Malik's hands curled into fists. The language was measured, neutral, professional, but every word dripped with quiet accusation. Whitmore had played this well. He never publicly humiliated Malik, never raised his voice, just subtle shifts, quiet doubt. Now with a single email, he'd sealed Malik's image as a cheater in the eyes of the administration. Worse, he'd done it without ever saying the word black. That was the trick, wasn't it? Nothing overt, nothing provable, just a trail of doubt, leading into silence. By noon, the story had begun to spread. 2 classmates sent him vague messages. Hey man, heard about the situation. Hope it's not true. Damn, that sucks. But like, why would someone fake your paper? Even Rachel, the one who once seemed sympathetic, wrote, maybe you should just resubmit and clear it up? I mean, it's probably a misunderstanding. He didn't reply. He was tired of defending himself to people who thought fairness was a default setting. People who didn't understand that in certain rooms, your skin argued louder than your words ever could. And still, there was no reply from IT. No support ticket update. No call from the dean's office. Malik had been effectively silenced. Again. That night, Malik sat at his desk, staring at a blank screen. He didn't even try to rewrite the paper. What was the point? He needed proof. Evidence. Something to show that he hadn't made this up. That he wasn't paranoid or aggressive, or imagining the conspiracy building around him. But he had nothing. Until 1:13 a.m. There was a soft rustle under his door. No knock, just the brief slide of paper against tile. Malik stood instantly and opened the door, but the hallway was empty. He looked down. An envelope. Plain. No name. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single printed document. His original paper. His real draft. Untouched. Unedited. Word for word exactly what he had written the night before his laptop crashed. His name in the header. His sources and footnotes. And in red ink, across the top corner, "They're watching. Don't trust anyone." Malik's eyes widened. His pulse spiked. Someone had saved his draft. Someone was helping him. But just as he reached for his phone to take a photo, a second piece of paper fell out from the envelope. An internal university memo. It read, "Turner investigation escalated to administration by Whitmore. Do not notify student until case is closed." Malik stared at the words scrawled across the top of his own lost paper, as if they'd been waiting for him to break. Red ink. Handwritten. "They're watching. Don't trust anyone." It wasn't just a warning. It was a lifeline thrown in the middle of a storm. And then the second page, the internal memo from administration. Turner investigation escalated to administration by Whitmore. Do not notify student until case is closed. The line rattled inside him like a low-grade tremor. He was officially under investigation, behind his back, with a professor orchestrating every move. The envelope had no return address, no handwriting on the outside, just his dorm number. Malik turned it over, looking for any kind of clue, a smudge, a fingerprint, anything. But there was nothing. Whoever sent this knew how to cover their tracks. The clean precision of it chilled him more than the warning itself. He snapped a photo of both pages, encrypted them, and stored them in a secure drive. Then he folded the originals and hid them beneath the lining of his mattress. That night, he didn't sleep. He lay awake staring at the shadows on the ceiling, listening for every footstep in the hallway, every cough from the neighboring dorm room. The trust that had once tethered him to the school, to his classmates, to the idea that hard work earned fairness was gone. The next morning, Malik headed to the campus cafe early, blending into the crowd of caffeine-hungry students and professors. He carried a plain notebook, not his usual laptop, and kept his head down. There was one person he thought of immediately after reading the memo. Andre Wallace, a black graduate student who had been in Whitmore's department 2 years ago, known for challenging course materials and asking too many political questions in logic discussions. Malik had only met him once, at a campus lecture about decolonizing education, but remembered the intensity in his voice, the subtle defiance in his questions. Andre had vanished from the department shortly after. No announcement, no goodbye, just gone. He found Andre through the graduate student directory. Still enrolled, now under a different department, sociology. It struck Malik as odd that a top logic student had left mid-program for an entirely different discipline. He sent a short, careful message. "I'm looking into something involving Dr. Whitmore. I think I've found something you may have seen too. Can we For 2 days, nothing. Then finally, a reply. "You don't want to smoke. Let it go." Malik typed and deleted his response 3 times before settling on, "I don't have the privilege to let it go. Please, just give me 5 minutes." Another day passed. Then Andre replied again. "Tomorrow, library basement, 4 p.m. Don't be late." The basement of the university library was colder than the rest of the building, lit by harsh fluorescents and lined with forgotten filing cabinets and bound journals dating back to the 80s. Malik arrived 5 minutes early, pacing the aisles, trying not to think about whether he was walking into a trap or finally stepping toward the truth. Andre showed up in a hoodie and dark jeans, baseball cap pulled low. He scanned the room before speaking, voice low and flat. "I shouldn't be here. You shouldn't either. I got a fake paper submitted under my name," Malik said. "Whitmore pushed it to the board without even telling me. Now I'm flagged for misconduct. And I think he's done this before." Andre shook his head, eyes narrowing. "He has. You're not the first. Then why hasn't anyone said anything?" "Because they make it disappear," Andre said. "Not just the evidence. The students, Your case gets buried under process. They tie you up in hearings. Kill your credibility. Then they wait for you to burn out and drop out. That's what happened to Devin Willis. To Carla Meeks. To me. Malik's stomach sank. What happened to your thesis? Andre gave a bitter laugh. Scrapped. Told it didn't meet academic standards. I rewrote it twice. Both times they lost the files. Third time, I got accused of reusing paragraphs from one of my own drafts without citing myself. They called it self-plagiarism. Said it showed ethical immaturity. I couldn't breathe after that. And Whitmore? Malik asked. Sat on the committee. Never said a word. Just watched. Malik stared at him. You really believe he orchestrated it? Andre met his eyes. I don't believe it. I know it. But good luck proving it. Man's untouchable. Malik hesitated. Someone's helping me. They sent me my original paper. Anonymously. Andre frowned. Then you better be careful. If someone on the inside's breaking ranks, that means they're being watched too. What should I do? Andre exhaled slowly, as if weighing every possible consequence. You document everything. Every file, every call, every visit. Keep a paper trail they can't erase. And never, never trust an email from campus servers. If they've got access, they'll plant more. Try to make you look unstable. They did it to Carla. They'll do it to you. Malik nodded, jaw clenched. Thank you. Andre grabbed his shoulder. I'm not helping you. I'm surviving through you. Just don't die for this. All right? Malik walked out of the library into the heavy dusk. Every passing face now seemed like a question mark. Every glance felt weighted. That night, he moved his new laptop to a secure locker in the gym's lost and found area he'd rented out under a fake name. He only wrote in public libraries off campus now. Always changed networks. Used VPNs. Carried no digital traces on his person. The stress of it all had hollowed out his appetite, his sleep, his peace. He couldn't concentrate in class. He didn't go to dining halls anymore. Every time someone laughed behind him, or whispered as he walked by, he wondered if they knew, if they had read the lies, if they believed them. And Whitmore? Still acted as though nothing had happened. He continued lectures with poise, quoting Aristotle and Russell like gospel. But every so often, Malik noticed it. Subtle digs layered in general remarks. Of course, Whitmore said during one lecture, some thinkers believe that knowledge comes from communal narratives instead of evidence. And while that may work for storytelling circles, we're doing logic here. Students chuckled. Malik didn't flinch. Then one afternoon, while rereading one of Whitmore's older published books, Foundations of Pure Logic, something caught his eye. A footnote. It was short. Simple. Easily missed. See relational induction patterns among migratory populations. Though largely devoid of formal structure, their thematic repetitions echo structured deductive logic. His eyes widened. The phrasing was identical to what he'd read in the thought trees of Akan, the African manuscript he'd been studying before the laptop crash. Not similar. Identical. But there was no citation, no mention of the African source. The passage had been lifted, reworded slightly, and buried in Whitmore's supposedly original thought. He flipped back to the beginning of the chapter, rereading it with fresh eyes. There it was again, phrases repackaged from African philosophies, but framed as primitive or theoretical inspiration, never credited. Whitmore hadn't just erased other systems, he'd stolen from them, and he built his reputation on that theft. Malik's hand shook as he marked the pages and took high-res photos, saving them under encrypted tags. This was it. Proof. Not just of bias, but of academic appropriation at the highest level. He sat back in his library seat, heart pounding. For the first time, he wasn't just scared. He was angry. And in that moment, Malik understood. This wasn't just a class. It wasn't just a paper. It was a war. But just as he prepared to send the photos to an off-campus journalist he'd contacted anonymously, his phone buzzed. A new email from the dean's office. Due to escalating concerns, your campus access is now temporarily restricted. Please report to the disciplinary board tomorrow alone. Malik didn't sleep the night before his scheduled presentation. He paced his dorm floor like a man on trial, going over every slide, every phrase, every citation. Not just because the stakes were high, but because the moment he stepped in front of that class, he knew what it would mean. He wasn't just presenting ideas, he was defending his legitimacy in a room full of people quietly waiting for him to fail. The email from the dean's office still buzzed in his pocket. Due to escalating concerns, your campus access is now temporarily restricted. Please report to the disciplinary board tomorrow alone. No explanation. No evidence, just one more layer of quiet pressure designed to wear him down before he could speak for himself. That morning, when he entered the Philosophy 401 lecture hall, the air felt denser, heavy with something unspoken. Conversations halted as he walked past. Laptops shut a little faster. Heads turned, then turned away. Malik knew the whispers were back. He could feel the eyes on his back like static. At the front of the room, Dr. Whitmore stood beside the chalkboard, arms crossed, a bland smile playing at his lips. Mr. Turner has volunteered, Whitmore said to the class, to share his progress on his unique exploration into alternative logic systems. A detour, if you will, from the structured, verifiable canon we've built this course upon. A few students chuckled. Malik caught Rachel's eyes. She looked away quickly. He stepped forward, laptop in hand, nerves wrapped tightly around his spine. As he connected the screen to the projector, the first slide appeared. Beyond the binary, tree logic, and the relational architecture of pre-colonial African thought. He cleared his throat and began. His voice didn't shake. Not once. He walked them through the core principles, how Western logic is built on binaries, contradictions and exclusions, and how Akan tree logic was layered, cyclical, designed to reflect social interdependence. It wasn't about proving someone wrong. It was about understanding how truths connect. He cited the original manuscript from special collections, then presented the footnote from Whitmore's own book side by side, word for word. A few students shifted in their seats. Whitmore interrupted. Mr. Turner, would you say that your sources are peer-reviewed, or simply anecdotal observations from oral cultures without formal validation? Malik didn't flinch. The sources are academic, preserved texts cataloged under suppressed disciplines. Their invisibility doesn't negate their rigor. Another laugh. Sharper this time. Whitmore smiled. Suppressed disciplines. The language of revolution. Tell me, are you arguing for logic or identity politics? Malik looked him in the eye. I'm arguing that logic is not culture-free. It's a language. And like all languages, it reflects the structure of those who designed it. The silence that followed felt like a vacuum. Whitmore stepped forward, addressing the class now. This, class, is what happens when we confuse intellectual critique with cultural grievance. What Mr. Turner has offered us today is not a framework of logic. It is an impassioned defense of pseudo-academic myth. There was a murmur of laughter, half smothered. Malik stood still, arms at his sides, heat rising under his collar. You may step down, Whitmore said. Malik unplugged the laptop, eyes scanning the room. Some students wouldn't look at him. Others held smug smiles, as if they had just watched a circus act perform. As he turned to leave, Whitmore leaned in close enough for only him to hear. You're making a lot of noise for someone with so little to back it up. Malik didn't answer. He didn't need to, because in the back of the room, near the exit, a figure stood. Not a student, not a TA, but Dean Evelyn Carr, the university's dean of students. She had slipped in unnoticed halfway through, arms folded, face unreadable. Malik stopped in the hallway after class, pulse still racing, when she approached. Mr. Turner, she said, walk with me. He followed her without a word, down the corridor, through a side door, and into a small private conference room, lined with dark wooden shelves and an untouched coffee station. She gestured to a chair. He sat. I've been following your case, she began, and this morning, confirmed a few things I needed to see for myself. Malik studied her face, unsure whether she was friend or another hand of the system. Dean Carr opened a leather folder. Inside were several documents, memos, emails, handwritten notes. She slid it across the table. You're not the first student Dr. Whitmore has tried to bury. The words hit Malik harder than anything Whitmore had said in class. Dean Carr continued. Over the past 10 years, there have been 6 formal complaints, all from students of color, all dismissed quietly. Each followed a pattern: obscure assignments, accusations of misconduct, academic hearings, and eventual withdrawal or transfer. We found inconsistencies in 3 of those case files, including missing submissions and altered timestamps. Malik swallowed hard. Why wasn't any of this investigated? Kara's voice was calm, but sharp, because until now, no one presented documentation that could survive the review process. You did, She pulled out the photograph of Whitmore's plagiarized footnote. This is serious. If proven, it won't just affect your case. It could trigger a full audit of his publications. Malik stared at the folder, 100 dots colliding. Relief, rage, vindication, but also dread. Why now? He asked. Why believe me now? Care looked at him, firm. Because you didn't just accuse, you showed your work. That's what they never expect. Malik leaned back, exhaling deeply for the first time in weeks. But the weight didn't lift. Not full. Dean Carr wasn't done. But she added, this also means you're a threat now. To his reputation. To the institution's silence. And if you think things have been hard already, you need to brace yourself. He nodded slowly. I can fight, he said. Care closed the folder. Good. Because it's about to get louder. She stood, offered her hand. But just as Malik reached to shake it, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. She turned the phone toward Malik. A new email notification. Subject line, Ray U. Urgent. Erner's source compromised. Sent from the university's legal counsel. Dean Carr scrolled down and read aloud. We have reason to believe that the manuscript Miss Turner cited from special collections has been removed from inventory. No record of checkout. No scanned copy found. Please advise. Malik didn't speak as Dean Carr reread the email aloud. The words slicing through the quiet conference room like a paper cut straight to the bone. The manuscript Mr. Turner cited from special collections has been removed from inventory. No record of checkout. No scanned copy found. That book, The Thought Trees of Akon, was the foundation of his research. The proof of Whitmore's silent theft. And now it had vanished. Completely. Not misfiled. Not overdue. Erased. Dean Carr's face was unreadable. But her silence spoke volumes. Malik's mind was already spinning ahead. The copy Miss Dorsey had given him wasn't officially checked out. That meant it could be discarded, misplaced, or untraceable without triggering an official inquiry. They hadn't just buried the manuscript. They buried the record of it ever existing. It was the perfect academic assassination. Remove the source, then discredit the argument. Clean. Quiet. Institution. Care finally looked up. Do you have scans? Malik nodded, already opening his encrypted folder on a flash drive he kept clipped to the inside of his wallet. High-res images. All pages, footnotes, even marginalia. She gave a curt nod. Keep duplicates. Everywhere. I already have 4 backups, Malik replied. The corner of her mouth twitched in what might have been the closest thing to a smile. Good. You'll need more. They parted without any formal decision. No grand announcement. Just a shared understanding. This wasn't just about Malek anymore. This was about a rot in the system that had gone unspoken for too long. Carr had to move carefully. Malek, he had to move quietly. That night, back in his dorm, he unzipped the copy of the university file Carr had given him earlier. It was heavier than he expected, not just in content, but in spirit. The first complaint dated back 8 years. A sophomore named Devin Willis filed a formal grievance against Whitmore for what he described as ethnically targeted degradation. After being asked in class whether African myths belonged in a logic course, the complaint was marked unsubstantiated due to insufficient evidence. Devin left the school the following semester. No contact record. No forwarding address. Just gone. The second was from a Latina grad student, Isabel Ramos, who challenged Whitmore during a seminar about Western Universalism. Her complaint detailed sudden grade drops, public ridicule, and eventual loss of her assistantship, also dismissed. The third, more recent, was eerily familiar. A Nigerian-American student, named Tola Adebayo, submitted a report claiming Whitmore altered her thesis focus mid-semester, and then accused her of academic dishonesty. She too vanished from the academic radar. Malik's stomach tightened. These weren't isolated cases. They were a pattern. Deliberate, predictable, designed to grind students into silence until they left. Whitmore didn't just disagree. He dismantled, and the institution let him. Malik started writing. Not just the thesis, but everything. He documented every exchange with Whitmore, saved every email, recorded timestamps, made logs of every meeting. He used burner accounts to store encrypted notes off-site, a shared Google Doc hidden behind layers of dummy content, a flash drive and a pen, another in the back of a disused surge protector in his closet. He became a data ghost, quietly building a case while pretending to play the role of the struggling student under review. The anonymous notes returned, slipped under his door, taped to the back of a library seat, once even folded between the pages of a textbook he pulled from a random shelf. One note read, "He does this when tenure's threatened. Every decade. A purge." Another, "The dean can only protect you in daylight. Keep your proof alive at night." But it was the third that made him pause. Expose bias, not just injustice. Prove the system protects him, not just that he targets you. That sentence haunted him, so he shifted his approach. Instead of just documenting what was done to him, he began investigating the architecture that allowed it. He started reviewing Whitmore's published works, cross-checking footnotes, tracing his citations. Several were circular, referencing obscure texts that only pointed back to Whitmore's earlier writings. Others cited authors with known colonial biases, with no critical lens applied. The deeper Malik dug, the more clear it became. Whitmore's legacy wasn't built on brilliance, it was built on gatekeeping. But Malik couldn't go public. Not yet. Not without risking retaliation. Not without something airtight. He considered going to the campus paper, but paused. He'd seen how easily narratives could be flipped. One misquote, and suddenly he's the angry black kid trying to cancel a professor for being too hard. He needed someone who understood the stakes, who wouldn't turn this into clickbait, who would dig with him. And then it happened. Late one night, while walking across campus toward the 24-hour off-site library, he heard footsteps behind him, not hurried, just present. He slowed. So did they. He stopped under a lamppost. Turned. It was a girl, mid-20s maybe. Red curls, oversized hoodie, camera bag slung across her shoulder. "I'm not following you," she said quickly, holding up her hands.
"Then what are you doing?" Malik asked, wary.
She stepped closer. "I'm Sasha Monroe. I'm a reporter with the Torchlight, the student investigative mag." He tensed. "Not interested." "I know what you're doing," she said calmly. "The secret research, the footnotes, the buried complaints. I've been following Whitmore's cases for a year. I had no proof. You do." Malik didn't speak. Sasha reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. Inside were printouts of emails, redacted reports, and photos of old grade rosters. She handed them over. "That's Devon and Tola. I interviewed both before they left. I never published the pieces because I couldn't corroborate what they said. No trail. You changed that." Malik narrowed his eyes. "Why now?" "Because you didn't disappear," she said. "Because you fought back. And because this isn't just about him. It's about how the school protects him." She took a breath. Softer now. "I want in. But I don't want credit. I want truth. Let me help." Malik looked down at the folder. Names, faces, history rewritten by silence. Then back up at her. "You tell anyone I'm talking to you, I walk. Understood? You publish anything without my approval, I bury the story myself. Deal." A pause. Malik exhaled. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel alone. Sasha looked over her shoulder, then back at him. "Then you should see this. I just got a tip. Whitmore's submitting a formal challenge to your enrollment. He wants you expelled before the hearing." Malik and Sasha met in secret every night that week. Basement study rooms, corner tables in off-campus cafes, the back rows of empty auditoriums. No phones, no laptops connected to university Wi-Fi. Just notebooks, printed emails, and whispers. What they were planning wasn't just a rebuttal. It was an exposé. Something that, if written carelessly, would be dismissed as a tantrum, but if written right, could fracture the very walls that had been built to keep students like Malik silent. Sasha handled the structure. Malik, the soul. They didn't just focus on the racism, though that was baked into every thread of Whitmore's actions. They focused on the logic, the gatekeeping, the hypocrisy. They exposed how Whitmore dismissed any form of knowledge outside the Western canon as primitive, while secretly borrowing from those same systems without citation. How African epistemologies were framed as folklore, despite showing structured reasoning predating European models. How academia had created a feedback loop, where only the logic it deemed acceptable could be published, taught, or tested, reinforcing its supremacy. Malik called it epistemic colonization, and for the first time it had a face. Whitmore's. The op-ed was titled, "The Logic of Exclusion: How Academia Fails the Minds It Fears." It opened with a line Malik had written, and rewritten until it felt like a blade. "If logic is supposed to be objective, Then why is it always used to erase people like me? The piece dropped on a Wednesday morning, first thing, in both the online and printed editions of the Torchlight. By 9:12 a.m., it had already been shared in every campus group chat. By noon it was trending on Twitter, with screenshots spreading beyond the university. Students flooded the comment sections, some with support. Finally someone said it. Whitmore been untouchable for too long. This should be in the curriculum. Others, furious. This is academic terrorism. He's attacking the foundation of philosophy because he can't keep up. There's no such thing as black logic. Logic is logic. Emails poured into the Torchlight inbox. Alumni, former students, anonymous tips. Some confirmed Malik's claims, some condemned them. But the silence that had surrounded Whitmore's reputation was shattered. He was no longer above scrutiny. That afternoon, Malik walked across the quad and felt something strange. Eyes didn't just follow him anymore. They measured him. Some filled with admiration, others with contempt. One girl actually whispered, "Stay strong," as he passed. But just 3 steps later, a white student in a fraternity hoodie muttered, "Race hustler," under his breath. He was both a villain and a martyr now. Back in class, Whitmore had not responded. Not officially, not directly. But on Thursday, he arrived 10 minutes early, in a crisp navy suit, and spent the entire lecture deconstructing postmodern identity bias in academia. This current trend, he said, without naming names, is to replace rigorous debate with grievance narratives. The elevation of subjective hurt over structured inquiry is not just dangerous, it is anti-intellectual. Our job as philosophers is not to feel the truth, but to prove it. Malik sat in the 3rd row, silent. Whitmore's voice never wavered. His language was still smooth, eloquent, self-assured. But Malik noticed something new in him. Defensiveness. A faint crack in the marble. The need to reassert control. After class, Malik opened his email and found a forwarded message from Sasha, with just one line. "He's pushing for a defamation review." The university denied it. Malik exhaled. It was the first real sign of institutional restraint. But it didn't last long. The following day, the university made its move. An email from the dean's office went out campus-wide. The philosophy department will be hosting a special academic forum next Friday, "The Boundaries of Logic in Contemporary Discourse," featuring Professor Edmund Whitmore and Mr. Malik Turner. It wasn't a hearing. It was a debate. Public, formal, controlled. And Malik was being offered the seat across from the man who tried to erase him. He reread the message 3 times, heart pounding. They weren't just going to ignore the op-ed. They were going to put it on trial. That night, Malik met with Sasha in the same library basement, where they first exchanged files. The weight of the announcement hung between them like static. "This is a trap," Sasha said flatly. "They're trying to bait you into sounding emotional or unprepared." "Yeah," Malik replied. "But if I don't show up, I lose the narrative." She leaned forward. "They're going to control the setting, the framing, the audience. Whitmore's been doing this for 30 years. This is his arena." Malik stared at the old table between them, fingers tapping lightly. "Then I'll change the game." He spent the next week preparing, not just for rebuttals, but for war. He didn't want to argue logic. He wanted to show that logic had already been weaponized, that the very foundation Whitmore stood on was cracked. He met with professors in other departments, pulled archived texts, spoke to anthropologists, sociologists, linguists. Every thread pointed to the same truth. Western academia had never been neutral. It had simply pretended to be, while gatekeeping every form of knowledge that didn't mirror its image. The day of the debate arrived. The auditorium was packed. Students sat on the steps, lined the walls, even stood outside watching on monitors. Faculty filled the front rows, some tight-lipped, others wide-eyed. Whitmore entered first, polished, graceful, eyes cold as glass. Malik followed, backpack slung over one shoulder, black button-up shirt, no blazer, no attempt to mimic the professor, just himself. The moderator introduced them quickly. The topic was broad by design. Is logic a universal language, or a cultural invention? Whitmore opened. His voice was steady, measured. He laid out the classical foundations: Aristotle, Descartes, Kant. He argued that while culture may influence perception, logic itself was the unchanging bedrock of truth. He painted Malik's argument as an emotive cultural critique, not an epistemic challenge. The room nodded along, familiar territory. A professor asserting dominance, Then it was Malik's turn. He stood at the podium for a moment, saying nothing. Then, when I was 15, he began, my high school teacher told me that African philosophy didn't exist, that it was just myth. He paused. I believed him. For a while. Because every book I read confirmed what he said. Until I realized, those books were written by people who never wanted African minds to exist in the record. He let that sit. Logic is not a god. It is a tool. And every tool is shaped by the hand that made it. He pulled up a slide. It showed two trees side by side, one straight, one branched and twisted. The first is Western logic. Clean, binary, orderly. The second is Akan tree logic. Circular, relational, equally structured, equally rigorous, but array. He explained the history, the stolen footnotes, the missing manuscript, the accusation. Professor Whitmore would have you believe that I'm angry, that I'm here to feel truth, but I've spent months proving mine. The only one avoiding proof is him. A murmur swept through the crowd. Malik ended with the same line from the op-ed. If logic is supposed to be objective, then why is it always used to erase people like me? Silent. No rebuttal. No laughter. No applause. Just stunned quiet. Then, from the back, clap. Then another. Then a wave.
The room erupted.
Whitmore's face was stone. As Malik stepped down, the moderator leaned toward him and whispered, "The Chancellor wants to meet you privately. Now." The murmur in the packed auditorium rose like static, tense and electrified. As students, faculty, alumni and media filtered in, camera crews from the local news were setting up along the back wall. Reporters whispered with notepads in hand, watching the podium like a courtroom gallery, anticipating a verdict. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It had become a campus reckoning, and the university knew it. Rows of academic regalia peppered the audience: deans, senior lecturers, emeritus professors, even department chairs from disciplines that had nothing to do with philosophy. Every seat was filled, every inch of standing space claimed. The atmosphere wasn't scholarly. It was something else, something more primal. Dr. Edmund Whitmore entered from stage right, to polite applause. He was composed as always, in a perfectly tailored navy blazer, Oxford shirt, and silk tie, no notes in hand, no laptop. He didn't need them. His reputation carried more weight than any presentation ever could. He took his seat with the quiet confidence of someone who had weathered storms and always emerged dry. Minutes later, Malik entered from the opposite side. No applause, no fanfare. He wore a plain charcoal button-up, sleeves rolled neatly to the elbows, black slacks, no jacket. In his hand was a single sheet of paper, folded one. He walked like a man entering not just a debate, but a battlefield where the weapons weren't seen. They were spoken, published, and buried beneath years of citation. The moderator introduced them both, then stepped back. Whitmore began. His voice flowed effortlessly, laced with that familiar performative humility, wrapped in decades of scholarly training. He recited Aristotle's 3 laws of thought, traced deductive structure from Aquinas to Kant, tied it all together with Bertrand Russell's formal logic. It was elegant, intellectual, and absolute. He smiled between points. Not smug, but rehearsed, just enough to remind the room that he wasn't just a professor. He was the professor. And then came the pivot. In recent months, he said, there has been a rising trend toward questioning not what we teach, but why we teach it. This is healthy. We must interrogate our frameworks, but let us not confuse interrogation with inversion, where centuries of rigor are dismissed in favor of emotional narratives, and cultural relativism is mistaken for epistemic clarity. He never said Malik's name. He didn't have to. The message was clear. He concluded, logic is not a cultural instrument. It is the architecture of truth itself. If we reject its universality, we are left with no compass at all. Applause. Strong. Steady. Malik rose. The room quieted. He stepped to the podium, unfolded his paper, and looked out, not just at the audience, but past them, toward the university itself. The walls, the ceilings, the invisible forces watching from behind cameras and boardrooms. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't smile. He began with a story. When I was 9 years old, he said, my mother taught me that truth isn't something you shout. It's something you survive. He let that sit. Every day, I'm told that logic is neutral, that it's clean, that it doesn't see race, or culture, or class. But what no one tells you, he paused, is that logic is a language. and every language comes with an accent. He walked the audience through his thesis, not as a challenge to Western logic, but as an unveiling of what it had hidden. He introduced Akon tree logic, not as mythology, but as a rigorous, documented system built on relationships and layered inference. He pointed to the historical suppression of African epistemologies, not by accident, but by design. Then he turned the blade. He revealed the footnote from Whitmore's own text, word for word, lifted from the thought trees of Akon, cited only in abstract, never attributed. A quiet gasp from somewhere in the crowd. He let the accusation hang there, not as vengeance but as context. "I don't believe logic is wrong," he said. "I believe it has been edited." Another pause. And when we edit out other ways of knowing, other systems of thought, what we're doing isn't just academic selection. It's control. It's deciding whose reality matters. He raised his eyes, voice steady. "And if your logic can't account for my lived truth, then whose reality does it serve?" The silence was immediate. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was shocked. Students stared. Professors froze mid-note. Even the moderator looked stunned. And then, from the very back of the room, where the lights faded into shadow, a single sound broke the stillness. Clap. Just one.
Then two.
The crowd turned. A figure stepped forward from the darkness. It was Chancellor Davis, the highest-ranking official on campus, rarely seen at student events, almost never at academic debates. She wore no robes, no insignia, just a sleek gray suit and sharp eyes. She walked slowly, hands clasped in front of her, and continued to clap. Not with drama, but with intent. Others joined. First a few students, then a cluster of faculty. Then suddenly, half the room was applauding. Whitmore sat still, jaw tight, his hands folded too neatly. Malik didn't smile. He simply stepped back from the podium, breathing slowly, heart pounding so loud he couldn't hear the applause anymore. The chancellor reached the stage. The moderator stepped aside. She took the mic, turned to the audience. "I came here today to observe a debate," she said. "What I witnessed was a revelation." She turned to Malik. "Mr. Turner, would you join me in my office? There's something I'd like to discuss." He nodded once, calm on the outside, but inside, a storm. As they exited together, Whitmore's gaze followed them, unblinking. Sasha texted him as soon as he left the stage. "Sasha, you just made history, but now they'll really come for you." Malik put the phone in his pocket. Because he already knew. In the chancellor's office, once the door closed behind them, she handed him a sealed folder and said, "There's something I need to show you. It's about Dr. Whitmore's past, and it never made it into the official record." The chancellor's office was silent, save for the subtle tick of the antique wall clock and the low hum of the central heating. Malik sat across from Chancellor Davis, the folder she'd handed him now resting unopened in his lap. He didn't move, didn't speak. The applause from the debate still echoed faintly in the back of his mind, but in this room, it felt irrelevant. He was no longer in front of the crowd. This was something else. This was the part they didn't teach you about in school. Chancellor Davis sat back in her chair, hands folded. She looked tired, not just from the event, but from something older. He noticed it now. The lines around her eyes, the careful restraint in her voice. She wasn't just a gatekeeper of the university. She had been surviving inside it. "I'm trusting you with what's in that file," she said quietly. It was never entered into the formal record. HR buried it before it could reach the review board. Malik slowly opened the folder. Inside were two printed documents, a redacted complaint from 2002, and an internal email thread from 2003, between HR staff, referencing past conduct concerns regarding Professor Edmund Whitmore during his time as a visiting scholar at Pelham University. The complaint was from a former student, a black woman named Diane T., alleging that Whitmore had sabotaged her thesis and manipulated grading rubrics to discredit her work. Her case was dismissed before it even reached faculty review. The email from HR referenced the risk of reputational fallout if further attention is drawn to claims without supporting evidence, and advised that quiet resolution was in the university's best interest. Malik looked up. "They knew," he said. His voice was even, but beneath it was heat. "They did," the chancellor replied. "And it wasn't the only time. But each case was buried separately. None ever made it to a full investigation." "Why are you showing me this now?" She leaned forward. "Because I'm trying to do what should have been done years ago. But I need your cooperation. Malik narrowed his eyes. What kind of cooperation? She hesitated. Just for a moment. But it was enough. We're prepared to offer you a departmental transfer into political theory, or sociology, your choice, full scholarship, independent research track, no more roadblocks, no more interference. The words hung heavy in the room. And? Malik asked, already knowing the answer. And you'd be expected to conclude your project without further public claims or escalation. She finished. No more press. No more open accusations. The university would consider the matter resolved, quietly. So you want me out of the way, he said. We want to prevent further disruption, she corrected. What you've done is important. But we're also responsible for institutional stability. He stood slowly. No. What you're responsible for is justice, not damage control. I won't be transferred, I won't be paid off. And I won't be erased. Malik said. Chancellor Davis remained seated. Then be ready. Because Whitmore's next move won't be academic. By the time he reached his dorm, the sky had turned overcast, and the first cold wind of winter had crept in beneath the clouds. Students passed him on the path, some with nods of support, others with guarded looks. He didn't care anymore. His mind was locked on the folder, on the offer, on the quietness with which entire lives were rewritten, records sealed, voices erased. He opened his laptop, pulled up his encrypted drive, and uploaded the HR file. Multiple backups, hidden folders, password locks. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. 30 minutes later, his inbox pinged. Sender, Office of Academic Integrity. Subject, notification of formal academic dishonesty review. His stomach dropped. He clicked. The letter was clinical. Cold. A formal charge of academic dishonesty has been filed against you by Professor Edmund Whitmore. The charge references the unauthorized use of unpublished materials in your debate presentation, lack of citation for internal drafts, and intellectual misrepresentation. A hearing has been scheduled. There it was. Not for the op-ed, not for the debate, but for daring to speak truth with precision. The unpublished material referred to was the stolen logic pattern from the thought trees of Akan, a manuscript the university now claimed didn't exist. And because it wasn't catalogued officially, Whitmore could claim the ideas were his. There was no official proof otherwise, at least none they'd accept. Malik leaned back, staring at the ceiling, rage crawling through his chest like smoke under a locked door. He knew what this was. They couldn't discredit the logic, so they'd discredit the source. And if they could make him look like the thief, he'd become the problem. The distraction. The scapegoat. His phone buzzed again. Sasha. They're coming hard. Legal is involved now. Whitmore just filed an internal complaint that you accessed faculty materials without permission. We need to go public soon. Malik typed back. They offered me a transfer. Hush deal. Sasha. You refused?
Of course.
There was a pause. Then her next message came through. Sasha. Then we burn it all down. Moments later, a third email hit his inbox. This one from an anonymous address. If you want the truth about Whitmore, meet me in room 119. Old Sciences Building. Midnight. Come alone. The glow from Malik's laptop lit up his room in sharp blue hues. As midnight neared, the message was still on the screen. If you want the truth about Whitmore, meet me in room 119. Old Sciences Building. Midnight. Come alone. The sender was anonymous. The tone tight. Direct. No greeting. No signatures. It read less like a warning, more like a summons. He thought about ignoring it. Thought about texting Sasha or Dean Carr, but part of him knew whatever was waiting in room 19 might be the missing piece, or a trap, or both. But after the week he'd had, the unknown felt safer than the systems he already understood. So he went. The Old Sciences Building hadn't been used in years. The lighting was dim, the air stale with dust and insulation. Room 109 was at the end of a narrow hallway lined with rusted lockers and forgotten bulletin boards. When he stepped inside, the figure was already there, seated in the shadows facing away. You came, the voice said. It was a woman, older, maybe mid-40s. She turned slowly, her face partially obscured by a hoodie in the low light. But her voice was unmistakable. Malik froze. Diane T. The name in the folder from Chancellor Davis. The buried complaint from two. You're still here? Malik asked, stunned. Diane slid a flash drive across the desk. What's this? The original complaint file. The unredacted one. plus faculty email logs, access records, security swipe-ins. You'll find something interesting on February 2nd, 3:47 a.m. A staff login into your account from a faculty IP address. Malik's breath caught. Wait, someone used staff credentials to swap your draft, she said. And I can prove it wasn't you. The next morning, Malik walked into the Academic Integrity Committee, hearing like a man carrying a detonator. The panel sat behind a long wooden desk, 3 professors, 1 legal rep, and an administrator from the registrar's office. At the far end, Whitmore sat stiffly, his expression unreadable. The room was quiet, clinical, designed to sanitize scandal. The chair of the panel began reading the accusations: academic dishonesty, unauthorized use of unpublished texts, and the submission of a falsified draft under university credentials. Malik waited, calm, collected. Then he spoke. He handed over a printed report, signed by Elliot Brand, a junior IT assistant who had been copied in one of the internal maintenance logs. Diane uncovered. In his signed statement, Elliot confirmed that at 3:47 a.m. on February 2nd, a faculty login had been used to access Malik's student profile. The IP was traced back to the philosophy department's private staff network. The panel shifted in their seats. He placed the flash drive on the desk. And finally, he said, eyes locked on Whitmore, this is a copy of an internal memo dated 2003 regarding a complaint filed by Diane Tate, alleging similar manipulation and retaliation. It was never reviewed. It was buried. The silence that followed was thick, brittle. Whitmore leaned forward, expression still placid. Are we to believe a decades-old grievance from a former student, one who never completed her degree, carries the same weight as formal review? Malik didn't flinch. I believe the truth carries its own weight, regardless of who's been silenced. The committee didn't deliberate long. They called a recess instead. 2 hours later, Malik received an email. Due to newly submitted evidence, the academic dishonesty review has been postponed indefinitely pending further investigation. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't a verdict either. Still, it was a crack in the wall. That night, as he sat in the library, Sasha burst through the door, breathless and holding her phone like it was on fire. Check your inbox, she said, grinning. Malik opened it. Subject line: Invitation to present at the National Conference on Epistemic Integrity and Global Logic Studies. He blinked. I didn't apply for this. You didn't have to, Sasha said. Someone from the Philosophy Ethics Council saw the footage from the debate. They requested you specifically. Malik stared at the screen. Unreadable. This is huge. This is national, she said. They want you to present on your thesis, and they want it in their keynote block. His heart raced, but it wasn't joy. Not yet. Because even now, even after proving the swap, the fight wasn't over. His name was still under scrutiny. Whitmore still had tenure. The manuscript was still missing from inventory. And too many people still wanted him silent. But this invite, it was air. A crack in the ceiling. A signal that someone somewhere was listening. I don't want a spotlight, he said quietly. I want the system fixed. Sasha nodded. Then let's use the spotlight to burn it down. But just as Malik clicked accept on the conference invite, another email slid into his inbox from a blocked address. It read, Careful what you expose. Not every theft is intellectual. Some are personal. Attached was a blurry photo of his mother, leaving her nursing job. Taken just hours earlier. The email had been brief, cold. The attached photo even colder. Malik stared at the blurry image of his mother, exiting the hospital in her blue scrubs. Hair pulled back, purse over her shoulder. It was night. The parking lot dimly lit. She was alone. The timestamp was from that evening. The message said nothing more than careful what you expose. Not every theft is intellectual. Some are personal. Malik's blood ran ice cold. He looked out the dorm window, his mind racing. Whoever sent this wasn't just trying to intimidate him. They wanted him to feel helpless, out of reach, and watched. This wasn't a debate anymore. It wasn't about ideas. It was about breaking him. About warning him that the closer he got to the truth, the more vulnerable everything around him became. He called his mom immediately. She answered on the third ring, her voice tired but warm. She was fine. She hadn't noticed anyone following her. No strange vehicles. No new coworkers. He didn't mention the photo. He just told her he loved her, and to be careful walking to her car from now on. After they hung up, Malik sat in the dark with the laptop still open. the conference invite glowing on screen. He didn't touch it for nearly an hour. Then, slowly, he moved the cursor and clicked accept. 2 weeks later, Malik stood at the front of a cavernous lecture hall at the National Conference on Epistemic Integrity and Global Logic Studies. The room buzzed with quiet expectation, professors from across the country, grad students, academic reviewers, and media observers all in attendance. The spotlight was no longer theoretical, it was literal, bright, focused. He had 35 minutes. Behind him, a large screen projected the first slide, Decolonizing Logic, the Silenced Roots of Reason. He took a breath.
Then began.
But Malik didn't start with Aristotle. He didn't start with Kant or Russell, or any of the thinkers the room expected to hear. He started with his mother. Before I knew what logic meant, I watched my mother reason with pain, he said. 12-hour shifts, racism from patients, disrespect from doctors. Still, every morning she got up and did it again. That was reason. That was clarity. That was truth in action. He moved from personal to philosophical, introducing the audience to Akan tree logic, with illustrations of nested truths and relational inference. He cited overlooked scholars and translated African manuscripts and colonial-era writings that documented but dismissed non-Western logic systems. Then he unveiled the side-by-side comparison, passages from Whitmore's book, next to the stolen, uncredited phrasing from the thought trees of Occam. He didn't accuse with anger, he laid it out like evidence in a trial, letting the audience connect the dots. And they did. Malik didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. His calm was louder than outrage. He ended with the same devastating question he'd asked at the campus debate. If your logic can't account for my lived truth, then whose reality does it serve? Silence.
Then
Applause. It started slowly, almost hesitantly, as if the room needed permission to feel what it already knew. Then it grew. Louder. Longer. Standing. Not everyone stood, but enough did. Academics approached him afterward, some with encouragement, others with caution. A professor from NYU handed him a card. This needs to be a book. A researcher from South Africa said, "We've been trying to publish work like this for years. Your voice might break the ice." A stunned-looking PhD student simply said, "You made it real. You made us see it." News outlets covering the event began circulating headlines by that evening. Undergrad shakes academic foundation. The philosopher who brought the West to trial. Student accuses university of epistemic theft and wins a standing ovation. But Malik didn't stay long to celebrate. He slipped away to a quiet corner, pulling out his phone. No new emails from the anonymous sender. No new photos. For now, he scrolled through the media mentions, wondering how long it would last. How long until the institutions recalibrated? How long before they buried this too? Then he saw a new video posted by a student blogger who had recorded the tail end of the presentation. The camera panned to the back of the conference hall, and there, just before the final applause erupted, Dr. Whitmore was seen standing up quietly, tightening his coat, and slipping out the back door. No goodbye, no question, no rebuttal, just retreat. Later that night, as Malik checked into his hotel room, the front desk handed him a sealed envelope with no return address. Inside was a note on university letterhead, and a single line handwritten in black ink. "You still don't know who helped you, and why." The letter burned a hole in Malik's thoughts for days. It sat on his desk, just beneath the corner of his laptop, folded neatly but radiating tension like a silent bomb. "You still don't know who helped you, and why." The handwriting was smooth, measured, precise. Malik read it over and over, trying to extract meaning from each curve and flourish. He checked the university letterhead it was written on. It was authentic, just aged, slight yellowing at the corners, and it was signed faintly, only with the initials E. Dr. Edmund Whitmore. The man hadn't spoken to him directly since the first day of class, hadn't acknowledged his debate rebuttal, hadn't said a single word of defense when confronted with years of documented sabotage. But now, in the quiet aftermath of Malik's national presentation, he chose to speak cryptically and alone. Malik didn't tell Sasha immediately. He didn't even text Diane Tate. Instead, he let the message fester, digging tunnels through his focus as he returned to campus. The applause from the conference was already fading. The battle wasn't over. And Malik knew exactly how systems like this worked. When they couldn't dismiss you, they absorbed you, softened your story, rebranded your win as a learning opportunity, and kept the machine running. But that didn't happen. Something else did. In the days that followed the conference, Malik's name began circulating beyond social media. Academic journals requested interviews. A podcast focused on racial bias in higher education asked for an exclusive. And then, without fanfare, without warning, something broke. A whistleblower inside the university's HR office leaked an internal audit memo to the student paper. Sasha got the tip first and sent it to Malik at 2 a.m. The subject line read, "They're eating their own." The memo detailed a pattern of procedural breaches, dating back 15 years. Most of them tied directly to faculty performance reviews that had mysteriously vanished, and several of those flagged involved Dr. Edmund Whitmore. The leak broke the campus open. Suddenly, former students from across the country came forward, people who had long given up on their voices being heard. A flood of testimonies appeared in inboxes, Reddit threads, and anonymous forums. He rewrote my thesis summary to disqualify my research path. I was accused of academic dishonesty 2 weeks after challenging him in seminar. They told me I was too sensitive to be in philosophy. He told me logic required detachment. What he meant was whiteness. It was no longer Malik's word against Whitmore's. It was a reckoning. The Faculty Review Board, under mounting pressure, opened a formal inquiry. Chancellor Davis, already walking a political tightrope, ordered full transparency, despite resistance from the older tenured circle. And for the first time in its history, the university allowed students to submit open testimonies to the inquiry board. Malik submitted a folder 3 inches thick. So did Sasha. So did Diane Tate. Inside the inquiry room, under bright white lights and carefully arranged water bottles, the committee listened to hours of testimony. They reviewed plagiarized citations, patterns of student withdrawal, access logs, file edits, and course syllabi designed to suppress alternate worldviews. A week later, the report dropped. It was 67 pages long, and it was damning. Dr. Whitmore had, for over a decade, manipulated grading systems, discouraged dissent, and quietly orchestrated the removal of students who challenged the philosophical status quo. 3 incidents were flagged as gross violations of academic integrity. 5 more were suspected, but inconclusive due to lost records. One section concluded that while difficult to definitively prove intent, the pattern demonstrates a sustained abuse of institutional trust. Whitmore's name, once the cornerstone of the university's philosophy department, was now a liability. The administration moved quickly. There was no press conference, no ceremony, just a short email. Dr. Edmund Whitmore has submitted his resignation, effective immediately. The university thanks him for his years of service. But that wasn't the end, because 2 days later, a courier delivered a thick, unmarked envelope to Malik's dorm. Inside was a letter, typed, no greeting, just prose. I spent my entire career watching minds like yours enter the university, believing they were here to change it, and one by one, I watched you learn the truth. This place doesn't want to be changed. It wants to be worshipped. It wants obedience masked as critical thinking. You weren't the first, but you're the first to survive. There was a time I thought I could do what you just did. But I didn't have your armor. I didn't have your mother. I didn't have your fire. So I became the gatekeeper I once feared. You still don't know who helped you. And that's good. Because if you did, you'd understand how close this entire house came to collapsing. Consider this my last gift. Stop before it does. E.W. Malik read the letter 3 times, then tore it in half. He didn't need Whitmore's closure. He didn't want his half-confessions wrapped in ego and veiled regret. But the sentence haunted him. You still don't know who helped you. Because Whitmore wasn't lying. There were too many turns Malik had survived without explanation. The anonymous tips. The paper returned under his door. The leaked access logs. Someone on the inside had risked everything, and still hadn't come forward. He brought the matter to Chancellor Davis the next day. I believe the network goes deeper, Malik said. She nodded. It always does, but we still don't know who slipped that manuscript back into my hands, or who triggered the HR audit. She looked at him for a long moment, then quietly, almost reluctantly said, Some allies prefer to remain invisible. They're safer that way. Malik wasn't satisfied, but he understood, because the system they'd cracked was still standing, still rebuilding, still dangerous. And yet, Malik's case had done something permanent. The university established a new academic equity board, comprised of students, faculty, and external reviewers. Mandatory bias training was instituted for all departments. A grant was created in Malik's name for undergraduates researching suppressed knowledge systems, and Whitmore's books were removed from the required reading list. He hadn't destroyed the machine, but he had changed its gears. And as he walked past the philosophy building that week, now stripped of its faculty display wall, he felt something shift. Not victory, not peace, but possibility. That night, a package arrived at Malik's door. No return label. Inside was a worn, leather-bound copy of The Thought Trees of Akan. On the inside cover, a handwritten message in faded ink. Your fire is not new. It's inherited. Keep burning. The worn leather-bound copy of The Thought Trees of Akan sat on Malik's desk like an artifact rescued from time itself. He ran his fingers along the frayed edges, opened it carefully, and stared at the inscription again. Your fire is not new. It's inherited. Keep burning. The handwriting was different from Whitmore's. Older, wiser, faded but steady. Whoever wrote this hadn't just read the text. They lived its meaning. That single line changed everything. Someone connected to all of this, had given him not only the manuscript, but also the permission to keep going. Not with fire alone, but with continuity, with purpose. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about legacy. Malik spent the next few days tracing the book's origin. He returned to the special collections desk, where Ms. Dorsey, the longtime librarian, watched him approach with a glint in her eye. I figured you'd be back, she said softly, as if she'd been waiting. Someone returned a copy of the Akan manuscript, Malik said, privately, handwritten message inside. I think it came from someone who's been helping me. Maybe the one who sent the anonymous notes. Ms. Dorsey didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached beneath the desk and pulled out a faded folder, thinner than a typical record. You ever hear the name Dr. Lionel Parrish? Malik shook his head. Parrish was the first black professor ever tenured in the Department of Philosophy. This was back in the early 80s, she said. He taught comparative logic, real radical for his time. Started introducing students to non-Western reasoning systems. African, Native, South Asian. He challenged the curriculum. Hard. Too hard. What happened? Malik asked. They buried him, she said. Official story is that he resigned after a controversial semester. But those who were around, like me, knew the truth. He was pushed out, publicly shamed, lost his pension, moved upstate, disappeared. Malik leaned forward. And you think he's still around? Miss Dorsey nodded slowly. He never stopped fighting. Just stopped fighting out loud. The folder contained a scanned photo. Dr. Parrish, younger then, in a brown tweed blazer, standing at a chalkboard with a circle diagram behind him. It was the very structure Malik had presented at the debate. Where is he now? Malik asked. Lives in Beacon Hill. Teaches philosophy out of his home. Doesn't go by professor anymore. But I think he's been watching you. Quietly. 3 days later, Malik stood outside a modest brick house, with a rusted iron fence, and a mailbox so faded it barely held letters. He clutched the worn copy of The Thought Trees of Akan under one arm. His breath fogged in the cold morning air. He hesitated. Then knocked. The door opened slowly. A tall, lean black man stood before him, early 70s, silver beard, sharp eyes that moved like they'd never stopped observing. You're late, the man said. Malik blinked. You've been looking for me, haven't you? The man said. I saw you at the conference. You didn't see me, but I saw you. Dr. Parrish? Malik asked. Lionel, the man said, stepping aside. Come in. The house was quiet, lined with books, floor-to-ceiling shelves. No TV, just stacks of handwritten notes, printed papers and journals, from a time long erased. The walls were decorated with framed quotes, many in African languages. Malik didn't recognize. One in English read, Truth has no origin, only inheritance. Sit, Parrish said. Talk. And they did. For hours. Malik told him everything. The sabotage, the fake draft, the fight with Whitmore, the silent war with the institution, and the moment he almost walked away. He didn't leave anything out. Not even the fear. Especially the fear. Parrish listened. No interruptions. Just small nods, faint hums, and long pauses where he let Malik's words settle. When it was done, the old professor stood up and walked to a shelf. He pulled out a notebook, hand-bound thick with yellowed pages. Inside were diagrams, old syllabi, outlines of logic models Malik had never seen before. These were supposed to be published in 1984, Parrish said, but the publisher pulled out last minute. Too theoretical, they said. Truth is, Whitmore had already started whispering that I was teaching mythology. Malik leaned in. He was behind your removal? Parrish nodded. He was younger then, eager, and scared of what I represented. Not because I was wrong, but because I was right, and brown. Silent. Then Parrish added, you weren't supposed to make it this far. Malik, I didn't. Diane didn't. Dozens of us didn't. But you, he pointed. You lit a fire they couldn't smother. Malik swallowed hard. The weight of history pressed on his shoulders, but for the first time, it didn't crush him. It lifted him. You helped me, he said. You sent the notes. You returned the paper. You guided me. Parrish smiled faintly. No. I protected the torch. You carried it. Malik stayed long past sunset. They talked about the future reform curriculum, the possibility of establishing an independent logic studies institute that included global epistemologies, not as exotic electives, but as equal pillars. Parrish offered to co-author a paper. Malik agreed. And then just before he left, Parrish handed him a sealed envelope. This came for you yesterday, he said. Forward here. No return address. Malik opened it on the train ride home. Inside was an invitation. The Oxford Symposium on Truth and Knowledge. You are cordially invited to speak at our closing keynote on the decolonization of logic in the 21st. Below it, handwritten in blue ink. We heard your voice from across the ocean. Now it's time they hear it here. Malik sat back in his seat, stunned. The boy who once sat in the back of Whitmore's class, unseen, underestimated, unwanted, was now being asked to address the global stage. Not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. As the train pulled into the station, Malik received a message from Sasha. Whitmore's old publisher just reached out. They want to republish your paper as the foundation of a new academic series. But there's a condition. They want you to include a foreword from Whitmore himself. Malik stepped onto campus for one last time. As a student, the air carried the soft hum of new beginnings, leaves turning gold, classmates chattering about future plans, faculty quietly smiling at graduates heading toward commencement. It felt different now. He walked with purpose, not desperation. He was about to cross a threshold, not away from this place, but into a legacy he helped reshape. His cap and gown felt lighter than expected. Wearing them wasn't just symbolic. It was a reclaiming. As he entered the courtyard, he passed the very classroom where this journey began. Philosophy 401. The cold wood doors still stood, but the wall beside them had changed. A vibrant mural stretched the length of the hallway. Truth is not owned by one voice. The words were framed by swirling branches, symbolizing the interconnected logic systems he'd uncovered. He paused, hand hovering on the paint, tracing the letters with his memory. At the ceremony, he sat among fellow graduates, with honors, wearing the university's highest academic cords. His name was announced in that calm, experienced voice that started with subject to verification. But in those few seconds when he stood, the applause was deeper, more personal. He'd earned it, and they felt it. Inside the auditorium, banners announced the new Edibio, Willis Turner Diversity and Ethics Board, named after the former students whose names had become silent casualties. The initial pang of grief at seeing their names morphed into hope. Their legacy lived on. At the podium later, Malik spoke with composure and fire. His voice didn't waver. He began with a recall. When I first sat in this room, Dr. Whitmore made a joke. He said, Detroit runs on its own time, as though my punctuality was a reflection of my origin, and I carried that quietly. He paused, letting the memory settle. But today, and he looked across the sea of faces, students, faculty, administrators, Dean Carr, even Diane Tate and Lionel Parrish in the front row. That joke doesn't define me. It defines what needed to be changed. He spoke of his journey from erased manuscripts to national debates, from silent resistance to institutional reform. He recounted the ripple effect, the curricular revision that integrated global epistemologies, the new ethics board, the grant in his name supporting voices outside the Western canon. He ended by reminding everyone, I was just a student, but what we proved together, that truth cannot be bound to one voice. That's what will outlast us all. The crowd rose, not just in applause, but in solidarity. Later, Malik walked across the stage to accept his degree. Diplomas fluttered, hugs embraced, Tears found their way from surprise and pride. When he reached the edge, he looked up at the mural once more, the words shining as a promise. As dusk fell, he lingered in the empty lecture hall. The circle diagram, the tree logic, was still on the chalkboard, sketched by a visiting colleague after his presentation. He sat at the front desk, notebooks open, digitized files playing quietly in his mind. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Sasha. Conference in London in 6 months. Oxford Network is forming a think tank around your work. More soon. Mullick exhaled and typed back. Let's build it. He closed his eyes briefly. Truth, he realized, wasn't just restored. It was unleashed. If truth depends on who holds the pen, whose story have we been reading all along? Stories like Mullick's aren't rare. They're just rarely heard. For every voice that speaks up, 100 more are still being silenced in classrooms, offices, and courtrooms. If you believe truth should never be punished, type yes. If you believe in justice, subscribe if this broke your heart. Let's make sure stories like his are never ignored again.